Well, welcome to the Impactus podcast. I'm Dean Brenton. We are here to equip you as men for a life of purpose and godly impact. If you have heard the name C.S. Lewis of Chronicles of Narnia fame and book titles like Mere Christianity, The Screw Tape Letters, The Problem of Pain, and countless others, you'll want to listen today to this episode. Clive Staples Lewis lived between 1898 and 1963. He was a British writer, theologian, academic, held positions at Oxford and Cambridge. And his legacy and influence still lives on today. And we're going to talk about that legacy that lives on through an organization called the CS Lewis Institute. I am so delighted today to have Dr. Joel Woodruff with us. He's the president of the CS Lewis Institute out of Springfield, Virginia. Joel's worked in higher education, nonprofit administration, pastoral ministries in Alaska, Israel, Hungary, France, and Northern Virginia. He's had a distinguished and diverse career, impressive academic background, including a doctorate in organizational leadership, a Ph.D. in New Testament from Cambridge. I just have to say, wow, it is great to have you on the podcast today, and welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, Dean. It's a pleasure to be with you here today.
Well, thanks for taking the time. So tell us a little bit more about you, your family, and the work you do at the C.S. Lewis Institute.
Sure. Well, I'm blessed to be able to work here at the C.S. Lewis Institute. We've been around as an organization for 46 years now, founded in 1976. And I came to the Institute really through the invitation of one of the former presidents, Tom Terrence. And we're a discipleship ministry focused on helping adults aged 24 to 104 to better articulate, to defend, to share, and to live their faith in Jesus Christ, both in their personal life and in their public life. And so it's been a joy to be a part of this ministry for a number of years. I'm blessed to have a lovely wife, Dolly, and we have 4 children, and live here in the Northern Virginia area, just outside of Washington, D.C., and blessed to have a supportive family that enjoys the whole idea of discipleship ministry and living out our faith. So I have a wonderful wife who kind of helps me to walk the straight and narrow in a good way. So in that way, so that's great.
Oh, that's fantastic. And the emphasis on discipleship certainly resonates for us at Impactus. It's been a strong focus. And I know some of our own team, some of our board of directors participate with the Institute. And so we want to learn more about it today and hear, how did the Institute originally form and why did it come together?
Back in the early 70s, there were 2 men, Dr. James Houston, who helped found Regent College in Vancouver, British Columbia. Some of you may know of Jim Houston. He was in a Bible study with C.S. Lewis at Oxford when Jim was a young professor, and Lewis an older professor, and he saw C.S. Lewis just as a model of a lay person. He wasn't a pastor, wasn't a theologian, but someone who, once he gave his life to Christ, sought to live wholeheartedly for him. The other co-founder was Jim Hiskey. I have 2 Jims here. Jim Hiskey was actually a professional golfer on the PGA Tour, and actually started a Bible study on the PGA Tour, and actually still has a ministry to golfers around the world. These 2 men realized that as they began to talk, they were actually at a conference in Jerusalem. And when they met there, they realized there were many working professionals, people who were well equipped for their profession. They had the education, the experience. But when it came to living out their Christian faith in the workplace and in the world, they felt like they only had a Sunday school education. They just didn't know how to thoughtfully and graciously talk about Christ and live that out. And so they began to pray and think about, how can we come alongside the church and serve these men and women and help kind of bridge that gap. And so it all came to fruition in 1976 when Dr. John Stott, who was an Anglican pastor and writer in the UK, agreed to come to the U.S. to Washington, D.C. area to do a week-long seminar for working professionals. And that's the beginning of the C.S. Lewis Institute. Since that time, in the first 20 years or so, the Institute continued to provide weekends and retreats and things like that. And that was helpful. But then in the late 90s, Dr. Tom Terrence, who came to the ministry, began to question, how can we see a greater spiritual transformation in people's lives? He said, what about why don't we take a look at the Gospel of Matthew? What did Jesus do that transformed those 12 disciples? What is it? How did they, turn the world upside down? And so it was kind of simple, not really rocket science, but the idea of what if we were to take a group of adults for 1 year, they keep their jobs, keep their church life, keep their family life, so create a program they can do while they're still working, but they commit to a year of discipleship training. And that would include one-on-one mentoring like Jesus and John, maybe small groups like Peter, James, and John and Jesus. And then the Great Commission, which we're all familiar with probably, says to go into all the world to make disciples, to baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. In other words, get people involved in the local church. But then the last part says that Jesus asks us to teach them to obey everything I've commanded. And so the question is, what do disciples need to learn to obey to be effective in living for Jesus? And so they developed this year-long program called now the C.S. Lewis Fellows Program, in which different discipleship themes or teachings are followed each month, and they grow during that year to become an effective disciple in the workplace. And our hope is that at the end of the program, they put together intentional disciple making plans to better understand their calling, how to walk in the Spirit, how to meditate on Scripture, pray, but ultimately how to really live out their faith in a dynamic way. And this program, the C.S. Lewis Fellows Program, really has become kind of our core program. The C.S. Lewis Institute, we still do events and we have small group resources and publications, but that's where we see the greatest impact.
Oh, that's amazing. So one of the things that you mentioned, and I think we miss that sometimes, because I think there's sometimes when we hear the name C.S. Lewis, we think he was, in the clergy, or he was a pastor, but he was a layperson. He actually and just used his skills and academics and his talents really to influence his culture, and was such an influence on, and still such an influence on all of us, I guess, in the Christian church today. What really drew you to the C.S. Lewis Institute? What kind of attracted you to that kind of environment of discipleship and lay leadership?
Yes, no, that's a good question. When I was in college, I was introduced more to C.S. Lewis. I think I read the Chronicles of Narnia as a child, but in college I began to read some more of his works, Mere Christianity, others, and certainly appreciated his approach, his way of kind of blending together both reason and imagination and heart and mind. And so that I had some interest there. My own career, I am kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. I ended up going to seminary, and then I was overseas in Europe for about 10 years at European Bible Institute, just trying to, in a place where our goal really was to equip both lay people for the business world and also to train pastors and others for church service. And so I think there I grew in an understanding of the need to equip lay people to live out their faith in a more dynamic way. And then I was blessed to come to the Institute just through relationships, invited to, I actually met Tom Terrence in a discipleship committee meeting at church, and it kind of took off from there. But I think over the years, I think what's impressed me is there are so many wonderful lay people out there in all the professions. And they really are the ones who have the opportunity to share the gospel to people around the world. Most pastors and theologians, they're kind of just it's the way their jobs work. They're tucked up in these churches and ivory towers, but they don't have the opportunity to mingle with people in the world the way you do if you're in the business world or the military or the government or it might be. And so I think the way the Lord designed it, if you look at the Great Commission, it doesn't say, pastors and teachers go and make disciples. He's telling the regular disciples, who is all of us who know Jesus, to go into the world. And it's really, that's the way it works best. And the way it worked in the early church, and I think throughout history, is just everyday Christians seek to follow Jesus and share their faith. And so it's always exciting to see people equipped and to go into the workplace and share their faith effectively.
Oh, that's good. You also wrote a book not that long ago called Discipleship with CS Lewis, kind of a discipleship guide along with the work that you do. Tell us a little bit about that book and why you wrote that.
Sure. I know probably many of you are familiar with C.S. Lewis's book, Mere Christianity. It was actually named by Christianity Today and a couple other publications to be the most influential Christian book of the 20th century. Many people have read Mere Christianity and found it to be helpful in their spiritual lives. Many people have come to faith through it. And it's a book that actually continues to sell millions of copies. I think C.S. Lewis would be surprised. He thought when he was done writing and passed away that his books would disappear. But Mere Christianity is one of those books that for some reason still captures the imagination. And I think part of it is that Great Britain in World War I and kind of World War II era is not all that different from the cultures that we have today in North America and in the West. We have a world which now is more antagonistic to the Christian faith. Many people view Christianity as outdated, and that was really kind of the worldview in Great Britain at the time, especially after World War I, where many people were dissatisfied with everything after the war. And so Mere Christianity, as many of you know, came out of some broadcast talks that C.S. Lewis gave on the BBC radio during World War II. It's interesting that he was actually invited by the BBC to give these talks on Christianity. And really because they realized there was a lack of spiritual morale and strength and undergirding in the British culture, and they just knew people needed to be encouraged. And so these broadcast talks, which Lewis did, ended up being put into book form. One thing I've discovered is that many people have Mere Christianity on their shelf, and I'll ask them, so have you read it all? How many of you have read all of Mere Christianity? And only maybe 25% will raise their hands. And I'll ask those who didn't, why is it that you didn't read the book? And many will say, well, I started reading it. It just seemed to be too philosophical, too intellectual for me. I just couldn't follow it. So what I realized is that the first part of Mere Christianity, which is divided into 4 parts. Book 1 is really more of an apologetics, philosophical argument for the existence of God, and it is a little bit ethereal. And so what I've done is I realized, what if we were to start in book 2 of Mere Christianity, which is really gets very down to earth and explains the difference between the Christian faith and other religions, and start right there. And what if we were to provide a way for people to go through Mere Christianity, which is still an impactful book, but with the Bible study? Because ultimately we need God's word to really strengthen us in our faith. And so I've written this book, Discipleship with C.S. Lewis, a guide to Mere Christianity, as a means for people to get into the scriptures and then read a chapter from Mere Christianity and kind of work their way through Lewis's book. And it's divided into what Christians believe. The first 6 chapters to really help people get grounded in the difference between Christianity and other faiths and what makes Christianity unique. And then to look at Christian behavior, and then an introduction to theology and discipleship through that. So my hope is that as people use this book, that they'll find the joy and the strength of Lewis's words in Mere Christianity, but even more importantly, get into the scriptures and realize what the Lord has to say for us today.
That's awesome. A great resource for those that might be listening that are doing small group ministry and you want to take your small group deeper. That would be a great companion guide to go along with Mere Christianity. Interesting point that you raised, and it just gets me thinking a little bit that Lewis wrote as Europe and the UK were becoming more post-Christian in post-World War II era, and really wrote in a context that now we find ourselves, North America becoming more post-Christian. What do you think the relevance of his writings and his work are for us today in Canada, US, in the context that we live?
Yeah, I think they're maybe more relevant than ever. In some ways, C.S. Lewis was very prophetic in what he was writing. I actually have taken a number of 20-somethings through this book I was just talking about, Discipleship with C.S. Lewis. And as they've been reading Mere Christianity and C.S. Lewis's writings, a number of these 20-somethings have told me, Joy, are you sure that he wrote this in the 1940s, 1950s? It seems like he's writing to us today. And I think they're right. Lewis was writing in an age when people had been disappointed by the church. And I think there are many in our society who've been disappointed by the church. And there are many people, too, who have found that other philosophies, other worldviews. It's interesting. In the UK at that time, you started introducing, Hinduism and Buddhism and Islam, and all these world religions were coming into the country. And I think that's happened here in North America. And so there's almost these competing worldviews. And Lewis himself his own journey to faith was one in which he grew up in a Christian home. His grandfather was actually an Anglican priest, but at a young age, his mom passed away, and when that happened, he was devastated. He'd been told if he just prayed hard enough, his mom would survive. But his mom died. His dad sends him off to a tough British boarding school. And Lewis eventually, by the time he was a teenager, considered himself an atheist. And he went into World War I as an atheist, fought in the trenches of World War I, saw the horrors of war. Ironically, the phrase we hear, there are no atheists in foxholes. Well, Lewis said he was an atheist in the foxhole. He still couldn't believe in God. But in his 20s, he began to realize that atheism really didn't answer the deeper questions of life. And so he explored various philosophies, Hegelian philosophy. He looked at pantheism, Hinduism, Buddhism. He realized he just didn't think they really explained the individuality of human beings, and Hinduism, Buddhism didn't explain really good and evil. And eventually he came to believe, really through the influence of Christian friends like J.R.R. Tolkien, wrote The Lord of the Rings, and others, that there must be a God of some kind. So he became a theist. And then eventually he was confronted with the question, there are these myths. He loved mythology. And J.R.R. Tolkien said, you love mythology, but could it be that the Christian myth, meaning a story with meaning, might be true, that the Gospels are right, that Jesus actually did come to this earth as God and died and rose again. And eventually Lewis came to believe that to be the truth. And so I think part of Lewis's own journey in coming to faith in Christ helped prepare him for a world that was very eclectic, for the postmodern world. And so he's able to address questions about faith that we're still wrestling with today, and that I think modern people are wrestling with today, because he himself explored all these avenues. And I think that's one reason he's so relevant. He was brilliant. I mean, God blessed him with a brilliant mind. Had a photographic memory. Although I am glad to hear that he was horrible at math. I'm not good at math. He actually flunked the math entrance exam into Oxford. Almost didn't get in, but fortunately, in World War I, after World War I, they were so short of students, they waived the math entrance exam. So somehow Lewis we could have lost one of the great minds of the world to math, but fortunately they let him in. Lewis, I think, is able to write in a way that still impacts our world today, since our world reflects so much of the ideologies of his world. And so it's been amazing how that's worked even to this day.
Well, you're right. It's just a prophetic voice for today, and thank the Lord that the Lord can use people who are not good at math as well. I'm in that category. Though that's great. You just hit on a point, and we're just going to go down this road a little bit in the conversation. But and some popular movies as of recent have picked up on this theme. But Lewis was also well connected to some close friends who really helped shape him, like Tolkien and some others. Tell us a little bit about what his value for friendship was and how that shaped him. And I know there was a group called the Inklings that he was a part of. Really, I guess, was a small group that helped him form and clarify his thoughts. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, it's interesting. From an early age, C.S. Lewis seemed to have a desire for deep friendships, and his own family life was somewhat broken as far as his mother passing away at a young age, and then his father was very emotionally distant. He never had a good relationship with his father, but he did have an older brother, Warnie, and he and Warnie, as brothers, I think that would be his first friendship, became lifelong friends. And in fact, actually lived together in their older years together. So Warnie, his brother, was his first friend. But then, interesting enough, in his teens, he heard about a sick boy living across the street by the name of Arthur Greeves. And so he was told he should go visit this sick boy and cheer him up. He wasn't excited about it, but walked over to the street, went and met into the bedroom of this sick boy in bed, and sees next to his bed a book on Norse mythology. And Lewis was intrigued by Norse mythology. He asked this new kid, Arthur, "Oh, are you into Norse mythology?" And Arthur, "Oh, yes, I love it." And that was the beginning of a lifelong friendship. I think over 50 years of letter writing back and forth, even after they lived in different parts. So Lewis was very faithful to Arthur, and they had this amazing friendship through writing. So that's one example. And he writes in the book, The Four Loves, he has a whole section on friendship. And he says, friendship is a little bit like this. It's when you meet someone, you go, what? You too? You like this stuff as well? And that's what really kind of happened in his relationship with Arthur Greaves. They both started with a love for Norse mythology, and that grew to a lifelong relationship of sharing ideas and thoughts. As Lewis got older, in his 20s, and as he was became a don or a tutor at Oxford University at Magdalen College, he began to run into some other like-minded people. One was J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote The Lord of the Rings. Tolkien and Lewis as well had a love for what? For Norse mythology. In fact, they loved it so much they learned Icelandic to be able to read Icelandic in the myths in the original language. Pretty amazing. But they developed a friendship through common interests. And Tolkien was a strong follower of Jesus Christ. Interesting enough, Lewis started making other friends, Hugo Dyson and others. And he also began to realize that these people were Christians. And he thought, how is it that Christians can be smart and intelligent? I was told that Christians couldn't think, that they had these old fake ideas. And so he's amazed that suddenly all the people he really liked hanging out with were Christians. And in fact, his authors he liked reading were George Herbert, John Milton, George MacDonald. He also enjoyed G.K. Chesterton. All had to be Christian writers. And he began to think, what is it about these Christians? I can't get away from them. But he developed strong relationships. And interesting enough, these relationships also led to some of the greatest literature of the world. Tolkien and Lewis and a group of others decided to start meeting weekly just to talk about philosophy, religion, literature, began reading their works to one another. So they meet every Tuesday at a pub called the Eagle and Child. They called the Bird and Baby at 10 o'clock for a little Irish stout and some good fun and discussion. And then they'd meet Thursday evenings at Lewis's quarters at Magdalen College and have tea and talk. And the friendships that developed out of these just intentional, regular meetings ended up impacting the world. And so Lewis was a good friend. He was always very loyal. He was a faithful letter writer. One thing about Lewis, he felt it a duty to respond to letters. And even when he became famous and literally started getting fan mail and getting hundreds of letters, he felt a duty to respond to every single one of them. So in his later years, he was spending an hour or two every day just responding to letters. Now, his brother would help him do that, but his sense of loyalty to people, the idea of friendship as being a very important virtue, it was something that really, I think, strengthened Lewis's life, and he also strengthened other people's lives through it. And so he's a wonderful model of the importance of friendship. And in his book, The Four Loves, he writes about friendship as being one of the highest forms of love and how valuable it is. And I think it's something that maybe has been lost in some ways in our world today. We have a lot of quote friends on social media, but we don't have the depth of relationship that comes through just meeting in person, regularly talking, sharing with one another. And Lewis was a good friend. And I think his friends also helped him come to faith. So it's a wonderful story in that regard.
It's fascinating as you share that, and just a reminder that out of the context of that friendship group came some of the greatest pieces of literature the world has seen. But it was in the context of that kind of community. Just a fascinating point. There is such a need for authentic community and real relationships today. And some of the studies I read, men in particular are lonely and lonelier than ever, more disconnected than ever. What's the importance in Christian discipleship of biblical community and friendship today?
Yes, no, I think it's very important. I think in the West, there's an independent spirit, which can be a good thing, and that we can get a lot of people like to get things done and move ahead. But there's a sense sometimes of autonomy that I can do it on my own. And yet we were never created to be alone. Go already back to the book of Genesis. Everything in the creation was good in the opening chapters, except for one thing, and that was that it was not good for man to be alone. And so I think there's something about the human beings. We're created for relationship, and if we can develop deep friendships and deep relationships, we're going to be healthier, more fulfilled. And I think in the Christian life, we see that people who are in fellowship with other Christians regularly, we're building good, deep relationships, and not just showing up to church on Sunday morning and sitting in the congregation and then leaving, but having actually relationships with other believers where you're extending hospitality to one another, you're caring for one another. You look at the early church in the book of Acts, the reason it grew so quickly is they were breaking bread together. They were sharing together. They took care of one another. There was a need in the church, so they took care of one another. And I think there is a lot to be learned from just looking at the early church in the book of Acts on that, and the importance of meeting together regularly. We were created for friendship and relationship. And when it comes to discipleship, really, there is no other way. It's interesting that you think about the Great Commission, getting the word out about this amazing message, this amazing Jesus who did so much for us. God could, if he'd wanted to, I suppose, just broadcast this to the world himself. But what he said, I want you, my disciples, to be my messengers and to actually take this message to others in a personal, dynamic way. And so it says something about the character of God as well, that he values communication between people in relationship. And so I do think it's valued. I think for discipleship to really occur, we need to follow Jesus's model, and that he, instead of focusing on huge gatherings, of course, he had a few big gatherings, feeding the 5,000 types of things, Sermon on the Mount, but he spent 3 years with 12 men. He invested in these men a lot of time, answered their questions. He had one-on-one relationship time with John, the apostle. Then he even broke it down to a group of Peter, James, and John, and another group. But he invested in people in deep relationships. And I think it's a wonderful model for us just to look to Jesus ultimately as the greatest example of friendship we could ever find.
Oh, that's so true. Sandwiched in between, it seems, the great commandment to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself, and the great commission to go into all the world. There seems to be, even similar to the C.S. Lewis birthing of all that creativity and literature, but inside of what God has called us into and what Jesus invites us into in the Great Commandment, Great Commission, there's also that great community he invites us into, that the world will know we're his disciples if we have love for one another.
That's right.
And so I think we can easily, in our independent world, we can dismiss that sometimes, but I think it's never been more needed than today.
Right.
In such a polarized, divided time, the call back to real, authentic community is so important. Now, that is really the heartbeat, I think, behind the Institute, to bridge authentic community with discipleship and culture and faith. Your mission statement says you develop wholehearted disciples of Jesus Christ who will articulate, defend, share, and live their faith in personal and public life. So how do you practically live that out at the Institute, and what kind of resources and tools do you do or use to make that happen?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. We use a lot of different methods, I suppose. One is that we do offer small group resources for churches. We have events. We have live stream events now, thanks to the pandemic. We've learned to live stream, in which we'll invite great speakers and things to talk about some of these subjects. We also have regular publications that come out monthly, and in fact, we have a weekly email. This institute's been around now for 46 years, so we're blessed to have 46 some years of wonderful messages and teachings on discipleship and apologetics. And those are available on our website at cslewisinstitute.org. And anyone who's interested in receiving free digital resources, you can go to Get Updates on our website and sign up to have information about the programs and offerings. And then we do have our year-long fellows program that's offered in 17 cities now in the U.S., Canada, and Northern Ireland. And in those cities, we offer this year-long discipleship program. And the great thing is we see people growing in their ability to love Jesus and to love others, and they're doing great things. We have people who are at the highest levels of government, the military. We've had generals and admirals. We've had chief of staffs. We've had ambassadors. We've had kind of these high level type people. We've had people start the Human Trafficking Institute, start mission organizations. But then we also have parents who are just trying to raise their kids in the faith. We have everyday business people, and teachers and lawyers and doctors and electricians and plumbers, and all different types of folks. And the great thing is to see them, once they grow in their core and their love for Jesus and understand how much Jesus loves them and also that he's called them. He's given them a purpose in life, that each one of us has a mission. And once we understand that, and that we're not doing it by ourselves, we can then go out into the world that God's called us to, and make disciples. And so that's been exciting to see over the years, kind of this growing number of people that are getting equipped, and what we call the multiplication factor. Jesus set it up so that if I come to faith and I share that faith with two people, those people share it with two people, pretty soon they have exponential growth in getting the good news out. And that's our prayer, that we can just play our own role in that. There are a lot of wonderful discipleship groups, and our particular group tends to attract probably your, in general, college educated, working professionals. C.S. Lewis kind of attracts that crowd, but we're open to anyone who would like to learn more about Jesus. C.S. Lewis is kind of the draw. His name is a draw, but we're really about Jesus, and that's our hope.
Oh, that's so good. If someone was interested in wanting more information around the Fellows Program and being a part of the Institute, how would they do that?
Right now is actually a great time for that. Our Fellows Program application period is open right now through April. You can go to the website, cslewisinstitute.org, and under locations, you can see if there's a city location near you. And if so, there's information there on how to apply. Our application process is tuition free. We don't charge tuition. People will purchase books and maybe pay for retreat fees, but we try to offer the program so it's available to anyone, regardless of financial means. It's the application. Really, we're looking for: do you love the Lord? Do you want to go deeper in your faith and be more effective in sharing it? Are you willing to make a commitment for a year to a community of other believers from probably many different churches? I think here in DC area, we've had 40 or 50 different churches represented at any given time in the program, and also people from different backgrounds. We have all different ethnicities, races, stations of life, ages. So it's the beauty of it is you get to come together with other like-minded people who want to live more wholeheartedly for Christ, and in the course of a year grow together and then go out into the world. So that's a great time. Just go to our website, cslewisinstitute.org, and under Fellows Program, and there you'll find the locations and opportunities there.
Fantastic. Are there other channels, social media channels, where they can follow you as well?
Yes, no, good question. Facebook, we have a CS Lewis Facebook page. We also have Twitter account. And Instagram. I'm not quite as adept in all this. Unfortunately, we have some good people who can do a lot of that. But certainly check out our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram feeds. And there are some great feeds that come out of that. And oftentimes there are events announced through that too in some of our cities. We have national, international type events live stream, but we also, a lot of the local cities, like Toronto just had an event not too long ago. So a lot of our cities will do events that you can tap into as well, be a live stream or otherwise.
Really great. I'd encourage you, the guys that are listening, to check out the Institute, go to the website, and if that's of interest, track the Institute down, and I'm sure they'll be happy to dialogue with you. We'd be remiss about talking with C.S. Lewis if we didn't just put a plug in for his works as well, and just a wealth, a library of. I grabbed a couple out of my library. This is
great.
This is a discipleship, kind of a devotional that I really found effective. The Business of Heaven. It's a daily devotional. And a good friend of mine gave me an old copy of Paralandra a few years ago. And so I've got a few. I grabbed them off my shelf today. And I'd also like to put a little plug in for your book, Discipleship with C.S. Lewis as well. That sounds like a great resource for small groups. And I encourage anybody to check that out. Joel, thank you today for being with us. Thank you for the work you do at the Institute. And we just pray God's blessing on you and your continued work there.
Well, thank you, Dean. And we're just thrilled about Impactus and what you're doing to reach men for Christ and help them grow in their faith and walk. It's such a vital and important ministry, especially in today's world. I think us men need to stick together and grow together and in faith. And so thank you for what you're doing and the good work there in Canada.
Well, thanks so much. As the scriptures say, iron sharpen iron, and our organizations, I believe, are doing that. And we pray that the work that we do will equip and shape men for a life of faith and the purpose that God has called them into. So thank you again. It's been a delight to have this conversation today.
Yeah, thank you again, Dean. God bless you.
You too.
Thanks for listening to the Impactus podcast. To learn more about living a life of purpose and godly impact, check out impactus.org.